So good evening, everyone, and good evening to the web audience as well. It's always an honor to sit with you because I grew up and I live by this. I hope I live by this standard that even though we all occupy our own particular space in this world, and each of us have our own unique bodies, but beneath the surface, beneath the physical component of our lives, we are essentially all wandering souls. And a soul does not consist of time and space and body-like experiences as the body does. The thing, however, is that the tools that we're so accustomed with, the tools that we use to navigate our lives, the ones we are most accustomed with are our sensory tools. So, for example, if you shut down your five senses, you close your eyes and your ears, your taste and touch and smell. You could try it out, but if you try it out now, just leave your ears open so you can hear what I'm going to say. So if you shut down your five senses, so what would you be left with? If your eyes were closed, your ears were closed, your taste and touch and smell were all shut down. So initially, the thought can be even terrifying because you think you disappear. But in truth, what you'd be left with is as close as you can to what your inner self is like, or you could say your soul. Not the entire depth and the intensity of the soul, but you see, because we don't need eyes to see ourselves, right? Even though we all check how we look in the mirror in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, some people check every 5 minutes, if they could. There was a Hasidic Rebbe, I'm not sure which Rebbe it was, but they say that he never looked at himself in the mirror because it's considered to be an act of vanity. I'm not suggesting that we're at that level yet. There are other things we got to do first before you stop looking in the mirror. But he didn't look in the mirror, so he never saw his own image. Can you imagine? Not knowing what you look like. And they showed him a picture of himself once. They showed him a picture. And he looked at the picture and he said, "Ahelike Id," which means a holy Jew. Had he known it was himself, of course he wouldn't have said that. But they showed him a picture of himself and he said, "A holy Jew." So one day maybe we'll be on that level. But you know, when you hear yourself on tape, actually, you don't sound like, right, unless you're used to it. You ever try to listen to a tape recorder or a recording of your own voice? First time I heard my own voice on recording, I said, who would listen to this guy? This is like... But I've gotten over it. But it is a little disconcerting to hear yourself how others hear you, or see yourself how others see you. So back to the topic, we don't need our senses to experience ourselves. We don't need, I said, eyes, ears, taste, touch, and smell to experience our own personal self. Why do we have eyes? To see others. To see the world around us. And ears to hear others. To speak to yourself, you don't need ears. You can speak to yourself, you can think to yourself. And the same thing is with the other senses. However, if you think about it, 99%, if not 100% of our lives were consumed by what we call sensory stimulation. Your senses are constantly stimulated by the things you see and the hear and taste, touch, and smell. So there has to be what we'll call a spiritual dissonance, a cutoff between what you experience all the time and the inner you that doesn't need those senses to experience yourself. And there's a direct conflict, a direct clash between these two forces. There has to be. Because the part of you that doesn't need the senses is very much your real you. The senses are constantly being stimulated. The question is, who has your attention? Your inner soul, your inner self, or the forces that are stimulating your senses all the time. Now, we don't usually see it as a clash until something gives and something breaks down. But it's a clash even when you think your life is going well. Even when you're looking at beautiful things. So it's true when you hear a beautiful song or you see a beautiful piece of art. So then your senses are aligned with your inner self, and that's why we call that tranquility. We call it resonance. The song touches a part of you deep inside. But how many sounds do we hear a day that don't resonate and do not reflect your inner self? Much more than the ones that do, or else we wouldn't be taken by music. If we were hearing sounds all day that touched your soul, we wouldn't be transfixed and transported through music or other forces of beauty. So we'll have reminders in our lives of things that are, we'll call them seamless, harmony, that resonates in the harmony within yourself. But most of our lives, we don't see harmony, we see discord and chaos. So initially it disturbs us. Look at a young child, the first time they see something chaotic, they're very disturbed. But then, unfortunately, this is the saddest part, the child gets used to it. And then chaos becomes regular. And no longer do you follow your instincts that something's wrong. You say, we're all this way. There was a chassid in the olden days in Russia, so there was no air conditioning. And you always wonder, what did they do? How did our grandparents survive in this heat, in this humidity? So some people say that, God sends a cure, magdim refuah lamaka, God sends a cure before the disease. If we didn't have so much industry and so much toxic fumes, we wouldn't have so much humidity. But that can be argued. So in the olden days in Russia, how did they get themselves air conditioned? They would have cold, dark basements that were out of the sight of the sun and so on. And if it was a really hot, unbearable day, you'd go down to these cellars and get cooled off and then come back out to the heat. So one day was a very hot, sweltering day in a city in Russia. So one chassid who was really hot went down to one of these cellars. They're also very dark, besides cool. And he gets downstairs, he suddenly yells out, he says, "It's so dark here." And one of the other people who was in the basement for a while in the cellar says to him, "Don't worry, you stay here, you're going to get used to it." So he started crying. He said, "That's exactly what I'm worried about. I don't want to get used to it. I want to know when it's dark, it's dark. I don't want to find out that one day that this was dark and I convinced myself it was light." In other words, as the Baal Shem Tov says, there's two types of darkness. There's darkness that you know it's dark. You know you're confused. You know you don't see the light. But then there's a darkness, hastir astir ponai, a darkness that conceals the darkness, that it's so dark, it convinces you that it's not so dark, or convinces you actually that it's light. That's when a person convinces themselves that my liabilities, they're actually my strengths. That's not a problem, that's a strength. Then there's much less hope. Because how do you deal with someone who's convinced themselves that what is negative is positive? And that what is dark is really, what is light is really dark. And this happens all the time. In modern psychology, they call it denial. It means to the extent that you don't even know that you have. Like I often ask people when they come to consult me, I ask them, "So do you think you have any blind spots?" So I remember one person particularly said to me, "Yes, I do, but I know what they are." So I smiled. And I said, so why is it a blind spot, if you know what it is? That person had too much of a blind spot to hear that question. And he says, "You just don't get it." That's what he told me. I said, "Okay, I have my blind spots too, The thing is that usually blind spots are about yourself, not about somebody else. Others are easier to see where things are going on. Usually we're more blind to ourselves. So, to go back to what I was initially saying here, I like to feel that our coming together this evening is hopefully a communion of souls, not of bodies. So though each of us occupies our body, and you'll travel through your lifetime in this body, and hopefully it should be a healthy body and a healthy life, but the things that will really mean something to you are the people that touch your soul. And usually a soul touches a soul. A body cannot touch a soul. Bodies touch bodies, souls touch souls. The Rebbe Rashab was the fifth Chabad Rebbe. When he was a little child, he had two brothers, but he had one brother called the Razor Zalman Aaron. And they would play together. Children play two brothers, they would play what they see in their homes. What was their home? Their home, they were the children of a Rebbe, of a great Rebbe. So as little kids, they would play Rebbe and Chassid. Some people play doctor and patient. They played Rebbe and Chassid. So the Rebbe, one of them was the Rebbe Rashab, acted as the Rebbe, sat down with a gartel, the whole garb, sitting there, and the Razah came in as the Chassid. And there's many stories about their little games like this. One story the Razah says to the Rebbe Rashab, "You're not a real Chassid. You're not a real Rebbe, because I tell you my problems, and you don't say, oy vey, like a Rebbe says." Anyway, he comes in one day, they're playing Rebbe and Chassid, and the Chassid, Razah, says to his brother, "What is a human being?" Or he said, "What is a Jew?" So the Rebbe Rashab says, "A Jew is fire." So the Razah grabs his brother's hand, so-called Rebbe's hand, and says to him, "If you're fire, how come I don't get burned when I touch you?" So he said to him, these are little kids, mind you, because when fire touches fire, it doesn't get burned. Now, obviously, you could imagine this little child became a big Rebbe himself. So, the same thing is in our lives. There's an expression, "Kamayim aponim leponim, kein leva adam laadam." Like a heart reaches out, like a face is reflected in water, so too one heart is reflected in another. Or the expression, sometimes we use Dvarim hayetzim min halev, words that come from the heart enter the heart. Words that come out of the brain, as brilliant as the brain may be, go into one ear and out the other. Or, if there's some self-interest, it may stay with you for a little while. But words from the heart enter the heart. Sincerity. It's true, sometimes you can be sincere, another person may be blocked or closed down. But let's put it this way, if you're not sincere, you're not going to reach someone else's heart. Maybe short-term, people can be manipulative, but hearts feel hearts. It's like fire doesn't get burned by fire. And when you act soulfully, people respond in kind. When you don't act soulfully, you cannot expect another soul to speak to you. So this is somewhat of a catch-22 situation if you're in the dating scene, in relationships, who opens their soul first, Because we all have our defenses up, and you want to protect yourself. But if you don't open up, why would the others reciprocate? So this requires some courage, some self-esteem, some feeling secure enough to be able to so-called be vulnerable before another person is vulnerable. And that's why we call love, true love, as being the celebration of vulnerability. How many of you know how to celebrate vulnerability? Most people in this world say vulnerability, forget about celebrating it. I find it as a weakness. If I'm vulnerable, there'll be vultures, predators that will hurt me. Especially if you've been hurt in relationships, you definitely don't want to be very vulnerable. They say the porcupine. You know the porcupine? It's very sharp needles. How do you say porcupine in German? It's that animal with all the needles on it, right? In Yiddish. Okay. The eagle is a porcupine. Okay. Eagle in English is a bird, nesher. But okay. So the porcupine, they say, has the softest skin of any creature on earth. It's interesting, because the underbelly of the porcupine is so soft, so tender. So God gave it these needles to protect itself. In other words, the softer something is, the more it needs protection. And the other way around, when you see harshness, sometimes it's a sign of somebody who have been very deeply hurt. Israelis like to call themselves sabras for this reason. A sabra, they say, is prickly on the outside, but soft and sweet on the inside. Today, sabras already have been defanged, so you can get a sabra that doesn't have the outside things. But a real sabra, I remember when I was a kid and I went to Israel and I got a real sabra, forget about it. If you touch it the wrong way, your fingers end up with these very microscopic needles. It can take you a lifetime to get rid of them. But they say, that's what they say, that Israelis are abrasive on the outside, but very soft on the inside. There's a truth to it. If you ever go into a cab, Israeli cab, they yell at each other and scream at each other, but then you see that they love each other. In America, it's the other way around. You're very cordial and so on, but you can hate the other person with a passion. So next time you go to Israel and you hear someone yell at you, don't be disturbed. They only yell at the people they love. Okay? Not always, but there is that culture there. So porcupine, the same thing, I don't know if you know this as well. I mean, this is common. I'm not here to give you scientific trivia. But, pearls, natural pearls, not artificial ones. You know how a pearl is formed? A pearl is an oyster secreting liquids because a piece of dust or another intrusive foreign object, and I mean dust, entered into the very soft skin of the oyster, and the only way it protects itself, because it's so irritating, is it secretes a fluid that when it hardens becomes a pearl. So you're not going to find dust at the center of a pearl because the dust is so microscopic, but that's where a pearl comes from. So some of the most beautiful things in life are a result of some irritation, let's put it that way. And sometimes the other way around, some irritation is often as a protection of the softest parts of ourselves. Obviously, a human being in control of their life doesn't let the bitterness or anger or hurt or disappointment from the past of your past relationships or childhood to spill over that destroys your life and destroys other people's lives. That's the challenge we have. But I know from my work, sometimes when people demonstrate very aggressive and abrasive behavior, often it's a hurt child that has no other way to protect themselves, like a porcupine needs needles to protect its soft skin. So I like to believe, and if this isn't so, please let me live in my fantasy, okay? Don't disappoint me. That coming together here is a form of a spiritual communion. And that our goal here is to connect spiritually, like musical notes in a large composition, and play some music together. There's enough harshness and enough injustice and enough pain in the world that I like to believe, as I said, that we don't necessarily have to bring it here. I mean, we all bring our lives into this room as well, but that we can spend a little while talking about and touching something that's beyond the here and the now. So as a small introduction, that's how I see this coming together. And hopefully each of us can learn to do the same in your own sphere of influence, in your circle. Everyone's got their world, wherever you are in the world, whatever country, whatever city. And if everybody did this in small ways, we could change the world. That's a fact. It's a domino effect. And even though it's a cliche, but it's very true, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And part of the solution means that you take the bull by the horns and don't wait for others to lead the way. You lead the way, and you allow some of your soul to shine into this life. And when you do that, you'll see it always has an impact. And you know, the worst scenario, even if it didn't, you still brought some light into the world. Not so bad. But it's always inevitable that there will be some reciprocity, and you never know where it's going to come from. And that's what we need a little more in this world. There's enough people driven by self-interest and by short-term gains. We don't need more of that. What we need is a few individuals, they're rarer among us, that will counter it with a different approach. So with that small introduction, which is also relevant to the theme at hand, the topic this evening is it's never too late. Can we change our pasts? And the reason this topic for this evening is because tomorrow is a day in the Hebrew calendar. It's called Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni literally means the second Pesach, second Passover. Yeah, with Jews, it's always very complicated. Not only do we have so many holidays, we also have a second holiday, just in case. You know, so it's interesting. Pesach Sheni. So how did Pesach Sheni gain birth to Pesach Sheni? No, there is no Pesach Shlishi, in case you're wondering, but there's a Pesach Sheni. Where did it come from? So it's a story in the Torah, in the chapter in Ba'al Oischa, when after the Jews left Egypt, which is of course the reason we celebrate Passover exactly 1 month ago, by the way, tomorrow. So Passover was celebrated through bringing an offering, a paschal lamb, but there were conditions that were required to bring that offering. And two conditions were there, that if you had to be pure, ritually pure, and you had to be within the vicinity or in the area where you bring this lamb, the offering. Now what happens if not? So here's the story. A group of Jews came to Moses and said, Lama Nigara, why are we left out? Why are we Nigara? Why are we inferior, diminished? Just because we were B'derech Cheko or Tmeya, we were not pure or not within the vicinity, why should we be deprived of the gift, of the opportunity to celebrate Passover like all the other Jews did? So initially you'd think, well, listen, you missed the boat, that's it. A lot of things happen like that. You weren't there, or you weren't able. So here, one exception, God tells Moses, no. It's not over Yemei Batel Karbonei, which means the day passed, you can't do it. You missed the mitzvah of yesterday. Today is a new day. You can't say, I'm going to do the mitzvah of yesterday today. It's a new day. There are mitzvahs, there are good deeds we can do all the time. So you could say you didn't give enough charity yesterday, you can give more today to compensate. But certain mitzvahs are bound to the time, that they're time related. You do the Seder Passover night, you don't do it a month later. You count the Omer in these 49 days between Passover and Shavuos. That's when the mitzvah is. It's another discussion why it's bound to time, but it's bound to time. We had someone call our office a while ago. They got the book, the Omer book, and they started counting late. Can they start the counting in the summer? Because they can't do it right now. They weren't aware that it's connected to the 49 days. So we told them, yeah, you can do the refining of your personality all year round. But the actual number with the mitzvah, you do that in a certain period of time. Yet, we have one exception. When it came to Passover, Pesach, God says to Moses, tell them that I will give them a second chance. That on this 15th day of Iyar, exactly 1 month from when Passover, the first Passover took place, these people can bring an offering, and it will be their Pesach Sheni. And that's why it becomes Pesach Sheni. Which is in itself, if you think about it, a fascinating thing, because one exception, usually it's not that case. You can't do, for example, there's no Sukkah Sheni, there's no Yom Kippur Sheni, there's no Rosh Hashanah Sheni. Meaning, Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur. You want to wait for Yom Kippur next year, fine. But you don't have a second Yom Kippur throughout the year. So what is the meaning and the significance of it? So one of the Rebbe's writes, says, that Pesach Sheni, it's a psychological message that is given to us for all time and for all year, not just for Pesach Sheni, not just for this time of year, is that nothing is ever lost. There's no such thing as it's too late. Nishtok ken farfaln is the expression he uses. Nothing is too late. There's always a second chance. Which, of course, in a way answers the question, why did God decide to give Pesach Sheni? And all other mitzvahs you don't find that, because he wanted to show once that the fact is there's always another chance. And this lesson is not just about Pesach, it's about everything in life. Everything in life. So on the outset, it seems like a beautiful thought, a beautiful message of hope, that no matter what happened, you can always have a second chance, even if you made a mistake. You lost an opportunity. The past is the past. There's always a second chance. But the question is that really true? Practically speaking, we can't turn back the clock. Are there no mistakes in our lives that many of us would love to be able to go back to and say, if I had a second chance, I would have done it differently? I don't think there's a person on earth that doesn't have something, some regret, that if I knew or if I had to give me another opportunity. But it's not that simple. The clock does turn one way. It doesn't seem like we can just simply do that. So it's a nice, as I said, it's a nice, inspiring thought, but what does it really mean? Is it literal? That there really is no farfal, there's really nothing is lost, we can really achieve something that we missed the first time? This is what I would like to share and discuss this evening. Obviously, the implications of this are very far-reaching. It affects us all in all ways. This isn't meant that we should continue making mistakes so we can then say there's nothing lost and we'll try it again. That's not obviously the point. The point, however, is many of us are haunted by our pasts. We're haunted by mistakes we made, situations. And this affects everything from our relationships to our family connections and personal decisions. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So the lessons from this can actually have a far-reaching impact on all of our lives. And above all, really provide us with a strategy. What do you do when your past is not something you're so proud of? Or a serious mistake was made? There are consequences. What do you do about it? Do you just forget it and move on? Can you actually go back to that place and correct it in some way? So, of course, this will remind us all of the concept that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. It's called tshuva. This is what usually we talk about tshuva. In Judaism, there's the concept of tshuva. Tshuva means, as we all know, does not mean just to repent. It means to return. So there's the concept of repentance. In many religions, you have a sin, an error, intentional, unintentional, whatever it may be. And then there's the ability to repent, to regret, and mend our ways. However, in Judaism, repentance is not the correct word. The word is tshuva, means to return. Actually, return and repent are two opposites. When you repent, you're suggesting the past was no good, and I'm leaving it behind, and I'm moving on to a new future. The word return means you're returning to the past. So how could tshuva mean repentance? Tshuva means to return, not to leave. And the answer is both very simple, but very beautiful and profound. The answer is you return to the real you that preceded the mistake you made. In other words, in Jewish thought, the soul of a human being is always pure. When a person transgresses or makes a mistake, that's when they left their real essence. So when you return, you're returning back to the purity. I'm not here to judge or analyze other religions, but the concept of repentance, on the other hand, very much is reminiscent of the concept of original sin. If you see a human being as fundamentally evil and selfish, then yeah, the only way to correct is to leave. Leave that quintessential evil that you are and find a new path. But in Jewish thought, every sin is a superimposed state. It's never the natural state. That's why in the Talmud it says, Ein Adam Avera Avera Elim Kein Nichnas Bei Ruach Shtus. A person will not sin unless they have a moment of insanity, which is a weird statement. Why would you say that? Insanity is actually a very legitimate plea in a court of law. If we can claim we were insane, we could say to God, we're not guilty, I was insane, what can I do? And the Talmud is providing us this excuse. Elim Kein Nichnas Bei Ruach Shtus. So the answer is given very simple. If a person saw the consequences of what they did, they would never have done it in the first place. For instance, would a healthy person put their hand in fire? No normal person would put their hand in fire. Why? Because fire burns, and why would you be self-destructive? The only way you can put your hand in fire is either you don't know that it's going to be destructive, or you don't know it's fire. So the Talmud is saying that there's some type of blindness. When a person is controlled or seduced by temptation, a blindness blocks you from seeing the damage of what you're doing. So you don't know it's fire. So you go ahead with it. If you saw it as fire that was destructive, no person would ever do it. So with that theme, with that approach in mind, psychologically speaking, tshuva, therefore, is opening up your eyes again and going back to the natural you that would never have done something that would have been destructive to yourself. So tshuva is very similar to this concept of Pesach Sheni, that there's never anything lost, you could always return, you could always correct. However, there has to be some distinctions because Pesach Sheni is a unique mitzvah given, and tshuva is another mitzvah. If that's what God was meant, He would have just said to Moses, listen, they can do tshuva, they didn't bring the first Passover, they do tshuva like you do tshuva on anything you miss in your life. So clearly Pesach Sheni is a much stronger statement than just the ability to do tshuva. So to really understand what does this mean, past, present, future, mistakes, and so on, it's critical to analyze for a moment what is time in the first place. Why is it so difficult for us to understand about how we can change the past? Because for us, the past is exactly that, it's past. You can't go back yesterday and rewire the events of yesterday so that today will be different. It's too late. Yesterday is yesterday. The deadline has passed. Now you have a new day. You can begin a new leaf. You can approach things in a new way. But you cannot change yesterday. That's our perception. But if you recall what I said at the beginning of this class, remember our perception is based on the way we understand the physicality of time and space. What happens if we can rise to a place that's beyond time and space? And therefore there's a place that's beyond past, present, and future. What would be then the situation? So you could say, well, that's crazy. None of us can transcend time space. We're all human beings of this world. But that's not true. Love, for example, transcends time and space. Two people can sit near each other physically and dislike each other. Two people can be 1,000,000 miles apart and love each other like they're right near each other. Love is limited by space. If you love somebody, they can be as many miles away from you and the love doesn't get weaker. Everything else gets weaker by space. Things that are defined by space get weaker in space. For example, a radio signal, sound, light, anything moving in time and space. Of course, the farther it is, the longer it's going to take to get there. But does love travel at the same speed of light, or speed of sound? It doesn't travel by any speed. It transcends speed. It's an entity that once it's part of your life, does not occupy time and space. So it's true, two people who love each other may want to be near each other, obviously, physically, and they want to spend time together, but it's not the time and space that defines their love. Time and space is simply that they occupy. So that's just an example. There are many other examples. An intellectual concept transcends time and space. 2 + 2 = 4 is not determined by what time or space it is. Maybe in a different realm, in different dimensions, those rules don't apply. But at least in our world, there are things, concepts, feelings, all not bound by time and space. So the concept of something beyond time and space is actually a very real thing in our lives. Unfortunately, we don't have many tools, and we weren't trained to access that place. We access it usually accidentally, as in love or as in other experiences that bring us to another, transport us to another time and space. So briefly put, in Jewish thought, in Jewish mystical thought, if you live your life by the rules of the physical universe, you cannot change the past. But if you live by the rules of the spiritual universe, you can change and rewire even the past. But I have to explain what that means. That doesn't mean, see, most of us would take that to mean almost like a time machine. You have these movies, you get into this box, this capsule, you get into that time machine, it takes you back to some place, you tinker with it, and then the rest of history is changed forever and ever. You know, you have these different shows and movies that interesting, different so-called changes that people make. But you see, this is a perfect example of applying a spiritual concept of beyond time and space to physical beyond time and space. The whole idea of getting beyond time and space is not trying to find a time capsule that goes back into time and space as we know it. It's finding a whole new, let's call it a whole new environment, a whole new plane upon which we live, which is not bound by time and space. It's not that you combine the two. So it can't impose these concepts that transcend time and space to the world of time and space. So let's be more specific what this means. We'll take a very specific example, and that happened in this class here. And I actually used this example when I was doing a radio show in New York a few years ago. I don't do it any longer, not because I don't want to do it, but because the radio station was sold to ESPN, and I didn't really want to proceed with my career being sports radio. I don't know if so. Not that it was an option, but it's not something I wanted to pursue. So we did a show. One of the last shows that I did was called "Growing Beyond Your Past." Okay. Now everybody's got a past, right? Is there anybody here that has no past? I'm not saying you like your past, but you have a past. You know, there are people you can pay for, they'll erase your past if you want. But I don't know if they can erase it from your psyche. Our past includes our parents, of course. We cannot go an evening by without mentioning our parents. And it includes our childhood and all the experiences, for good or for bad, of our past. Some of us, as I said, would rather forget it. We'd rather move on. Some of us, even though we try to move on, we can't really. And some of us have very beautiful pasts, actually. But a past is a complicated thing because it's part of who you are, it's shaped who you are, but it's no longer there for you to touch it. It's like a foundation that was put into place and you really can't tamper with it. So I've addressed the issue of growing through our past because in my own journeys, I've met many people who've had very complicated pasts. I have to say as a disclaimer, I myself grew up relatively, even though they say everybody everyone lives in some dysfunctional form of a family, which may or may not be true, but relatively speaking, I cannot say my home was an abusive home. At least not my memory, not in my conscious memory. It was a loving home. And I came to discover my own naivete that not all homes were exactly like that. And I discovered it often in very painful ways. People shared with me their lives. And some of those lives were like, I couldn't first believe even possible how people can hurt others in such profound ways, especially parents to children, innocent children being hurt by parents. But when you hear it enough times, and from people you see are sincere, you begin to believe it. And more than believe it, they came coming to me for help. And here's a past you cannot change. What happened, happened. A child grows up in a home where there was abuse. An alcoholic father who would beat his wife and his children almost every night. So all these beautiful concepts of transcending time and space, what does that mean? You go back to the home where you lived, and you can stop your father from beating everyone up, and all the consequences that came out of that. Obviously, that's not what we're discussing. That's not at all what we're suggesting here. So what does it mean? As I said, this concept is beautiful, but you have to really explain it, especially when you get down to the real nitty-gritty of life. And as you know, this is not a theoretical question. I hope no one here has to deal with anything similar. But unfortunately, most of us do, and if we don't, someone close to us does. Or another example of mistakes we made. Mistakes we've made. So I told the story of a fellow who came to this class before we had this place here. And he walked into the room here. I think I told you the story yesterday, by the way. He walked into not this room, to the class where we were giving the class. It was in Upper West Side. And said to me, it was at the end of the class, he says, I know you take questions. I want to ask you a question. I grew up in somewhat of a religious home where I was bar mitzvahed and I put on tefillin every day. But then later in life, my teenage years, I rejected it all. It became to me something very mechanical, programmatic, not robotic, not something that I felt touched my soul. And I left my Jewish roots. And I went off to the West Coast, and I discovered my God through Zen Buddhism and LSD, primarily. And he described his first awakening, his first acid trip in L.A., which was terrifying to him, but he said, then suddenly I saw a whole new world. And I realized there's a higher truth and a higher reality in all of existence. And that began my true spiritual path. So once, on my way back to New York, I was on a plane. And whenever I went on a plane, this is what he was saying. I could tell you he was high while he was saying all this as well. You could tell from a person's eyes and voice. And he said, I always drop some acid on the plane because it's very conducive to the flight in more ways than one. You go up there, you look out into the clouds. He described the clouds, and I saw from the laughter in the class that a lot of people had similar experiences. And the vibrating clouds, the pulsating skies, the colors, the works. And suddenly I hear in the back of the plane, I hear a group of Jews davening, and I hear them saying Kaddish, 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 which is prayer we say every day. And I felt suddenly the celestial angels and the heavens open up, and I experienced it through my LSD trip. This is how he's sharing. So I jumped up, I went to the back of the plane, and I had I put on tefillin for the first time in 20 years, and I began to pray, and I started putting on tefillin again. And I have now come back to my observance. So what do you say about that, he says to me. I became an observant Jew through LSD. What do you think? Do you endorse it or don't you? And I found the question extremely intriguing and challenging, because what do you say? You know, there are rabbis that would close their ears and say, I can't believe this and I can't hear you, you know. And then there are rabbis who would say, so what? Okay, there are many paths to Rome. I don't know, to Jerusalem, but to Rome at least. And so one way or another, you reached it. So I wasn't ready to go endorse this path. On the other hand, I didn't feel I should reject a person's experience. So how do they, as they say, how do you throw out the pit but keep the fruit? How do you throw out the peel? You eat the fruit, but you throw out the peel. And I remembered, and this is a concept in in Hasidic thought. It comes from the Alter Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad Chassidus. And he says a very powerful thing about the issue of lust and desire, what we call in Hebrew taiva. So he talks about it in this way. He says, you have to distinguish between the koyach hamesava and the taiva itself, which means in English, it means the power to desire something and the object of desire. The object of the desire can be extremely destructive and dangerous, but the power to desire is always healthy and holy, because God gave us the power to desire. That's not man-made. The fact that human beings desire things, the fact that we have the power to desire things, to the point of true desire. I'm not just saying now we like it. I'm talking about desire, lust, true coveting something, to the point of obsession. That's a human feature that was given to us as your arms and legs, as part of who we are. But what we choose to fulfill that desire, that's already up to you. Some people choose to fulfill the desire with something that can be absolutely destructive. And others fulfill the desire through beautiful things. So he says what you have to do is rechannel the power of desire to objects that are healthier. So a little child playing on the floor with toys. A teenager playing with whatever teenagers play with. And an adult reading a book. And a tzaddik doing a good deed. Which one of these is the most which one of these has the most passionate and desire in the world? The answer is they're all equal. The difference is what the object is. For an adult, playing with a toy on the floor is meaningless. But the child, for a child's mind, that object of desire satisfies the child. So a person can be involved in the most destructive behavior, whether it's sexual, whether it's other addictions that a person has complete passion for, but it's absolutely destructive. That desire is there, but the object is the problem. Another person could have equal amount of passion and desire, and yet the object is healthy, so it's a whole different world. Unfortunately, many of us feel that you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you desired something, and the object was no good, what we usually do is also the lobotomy of cutting out also the power to desire. So using this principle, I didn't say all this that evening because this guy didn't have patience for that. So I said like this, let me put it this way. Imagine somebody falls into a coma, and all the medication in the world doesn't help to get him out of the coma. At some point, he's beginning atrophy, and the doctors are saying, giving up hope, you got to get him out of this coma. And one doctor suggests, okay, we'll give him a massive dose of drugs to shake up his system, maybe he'll wake up. You'd never give it to a healthy person, but for this person, you do. And it wakes him up. So I said, would you recommend now this massive dose of drugs to everybody that wants it? I told him, that you and many people have fallen into a spiritual coma. I'm not judgmental, but when you don't have a spiritual, the word for it, the spiritual ignition, so you're going to search for anything that's going to ignite it. And maybe God, in His strange, mysterious ways, planted in all kinds of different objects and chemicals and mushrooms and in the Far East reminders of higher truth. I have no question about that. So for a person in a coma, that's where you found it. Had you met somebody that could have given it to you in a healthy way, that would have been, of course, better. But now you found it. I'm not here to invalidate that past. I'm here to redeem it. Now that you've discovered it, the question is, do you have to continue taking these drugs in order to get to that place? Or now you can find natural and healthy ways to travel to the same place without any foreign substances. That's what I challenge you. Or it's become a crutch where you must do this and this in order to get to that place. So the point here is this. We may not be able to travel back to our past to change an actual action that happened, like in the case of abuse or other examples that I gave earlier. That's not what we're talking about. But we do have the power, is to travel back to the past and free the object of the desire from the desire. And then you can learn to channel it into new ways. What this means is this. It's a little subtle concept and a little complicated even, but I've seen it, and I've seen it in action in many people's lives who have healed. Why are some people able to heal from abusive homes and others are not? Well, I should rephrase it, not why some are able and some are not. I think everyone's able. Why do some heal and what's the ingredient? And I've always looked for it, because when people come to you and they ask for solutions, suggestions, you always want to learn from people who were successful. If someone grew up in a home that was extremely dysfunctional, and they learned to grow, they learned to build a relationship, they learned to build a home, and then another person's life is a complete wreck, you want to look at those success stories. What did they do? And I can tell you across the board what I see always what they did was, they were able to separate between what happened to them and how they grew from it. That separation is key. The problem is that separation is extremely difficult for a child. When someone who supposed to speak loves you, and I'm just using this as a strong example simply to make the point. Obviously, it can be applied in many, many ways. When someone who's supposed to love you, a parent, instead hurts you, why is that so destructive? For adults, it's not such a problem in the same way. Why? Because an adult distinguishes. But for a child is simple. What you see is what you get. If love is supposed to be coming from this direction, and suddenly pain comes from this direction, first thing, a child is confused. This is supposed to be loving. Why is it causing me pain? So a child creates distortions to justify it. Oh, maybe I don't really understand. Maybe it is really love. Maybe I made a mistake. And a child starts questioning its own instincts. By the time it grows into an adult, it doesn't know right from wrong, because it doesn't know it loses its so-called center of gravity. It's the compass. And that's the problem. The confusion is the problem. And once there's confusion, you build your life built on that confusion. If I need to elaborate more, I will, but I'm sure some of you understand what I'm saying, or am I just... Okay. So with that being said, the problem is, in other words, not just the pain that happened, it's where it came from. If it didn't come from a person who was supposed to give you love, then it's a whole different world. You didn't have any expectations. I'm not suggesting that it's better or it's more tolerable if someone who's a stranger hurts you, but it doesn't have quite the same psychological destruction of destroying your navigational tools. Then you have to get out of the line of fire and find a new place to go to. But how do you do that in your own home, where your parents are supposed to protect you when you come, and your home, the place of nurturing, the only place you have in your life? Because for a child, walking outside the door of the home is like walking over the earth. What are you supposed to do then? There's no recourse. So the distortions that creates in a child's mind is beyond description. But across the board, what I've seen and witnessed, and I've watched it closely, are the people who learn to separate the two, between what happened to them and who they are. In other words, they stop getting confused. That doesn't mean they don't have the pain. That doesn't mean that they suddenly forgive and everything is over with. But they don't let themselves be a product and a victim of what happened to them. Because what happens is, when a person is victimized, you begin to feel you're at fault. Why is it children, for instance, of divorce will always blame themselves for it? It's a weird thing. Your parents divorced. Why are you blaming yourself? Because children can't accept that their parents are imperfect. So then only other reason is me. What other ingredient was there? Now, it doesn't make any sense logically, but who says things have to make sense when you're in the world of emotions? So to learn this separation is hard work. It's very hard work. But if you want to talk about going back to the past, that's what means going back to the past. Not necessarily regression of repressed dreams and thoughts and experiences. Now, there's a debate rages whether it's healthy to go back to the abuse that some of us have forgotten. I'm not getting into that discussion. It's another discussion. My general opinion of that is you only go if you have to, if there's no choice. Just to go because it sounds, well, I don't want to say it sounds exciting, but because someone feels that you have to dig up every skeleton, I don't know if that's something that's necessary. If all the other things failed and someone suggests a professional, maybe it's something to look at to some extent. But I'm addressing a different aspect of it, and I'm addressing is a past experience. The ones I'm, of course, addressing now are the hardest ones, childhood experiences. But let's go back to this guy with LSD. I don't know whether he took my advice or not. But if he didn't, the reason is because it's easy. It's much easier to get a spiritual high by ingesting something than by having to work on it. That's the simple thing. That's his addiction. It's not because he's so spiritual. It's because he found a way that's so-called easy, a quick fix. But the truth is, the real goal in a situation like this is that if you did something wrong, let's say you wronged somebody in your life. So number one is you have to revisit it. It's correct. You have to revisit it. And what you have to learn to do is distinguish between two things. There's the peel that you have to learn to destroy. There are things in the past that we may have done that there's no room for them to be repeated again. You have to make sure that never happens again. It's not easier said, it's easier said than done. But then there's another thing, and that's the hardest part of all. What is redeemed from that experience that you can use to help the future of the life? I told a story in my last email about this special child who grew up. He was given away by his parents because they thought he had mental disorder. He had some disorders, but it wasn't exactly to the extent. Have any of you read my email last week about it? Anyway, it's a whole long story. He came to this class as well. And here I'll show you an example, a person who redeemed his childhood. Still cries over it, but redeemed it. He went into the world to help children like himself because he could specifically identify and empathize with people because he was in that situation. And this is his healing. He has an insight. And I can tell you a refinement that you find very rarely in this world. I've met him. I still know him. We're good friends. He came to this class looking for something. He was a child given away by his parents before he ever knew them because they thought he was born handicapped. And they didn't want to have him in their lives. I'm not here to judge them. With a little chutzpah and some craziness, I got them back together, him and his parents. It's a long story, but the bottom line is I called his father up, who I found out his number, prominent family in New York, wealthy family. They paid for all his taken care of, but they didn't want to see him. And I just I built up the nerve and I guess the anger. I called up his father and I said to him, look, I know your son, and I think it'd be good to. He's a very special person. I think it would be good to meet. So my first experiences were a few hang-ups. He hung up on me more than once. You ever been hung up on? So you know how it feels. But I didn't really think that. It just built up my nerve even more. The bottom line is it took months, but I finally got them together in a very, very awkward and extremely complicated situation. And they insisted that I be there, which I didn't want to be, but I was there. I'm ending up in a room with a son who's now close to 30 years old and is far, far more developed than his parents will ever be, has handicaps, has certain motor function things, hard for him to speak, but the refinement beyond anything you've ever seen. A person who really grew from his pain. And we're sitting there, and no one had anything to say to each other. So I had to break the ice, so I started saying, I'm sure that this young man has a lot of pain inside of him. I'm sure you have pain, but we're here to try to connect. I think everybody has something to say. What else do you say? So out of the blue, he saved the day in a way. So with his stutter and difficulty to speak, he says to his parents, and I could see he had practiced this, because he never used the word mama and papa at all. He didn't even pronounce it. He used to say mama and papa. The first time in his life, he uses the words to his parents, and this is what he says to them. He says, mama and papa, he says, I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. I've forgiven you. Can you forgive me? Can you imagine? Well, I ran out of that room after that, and I led them on their own. And I don't know what they did there, but they have a relationship today. It's still complicated. A lot of cans of worms have been opened since. The mother has a very destructive past. The father has his own issues. But while I'm telling you the story, here's a man, and I guess I could take a little credit because I brought them together. He could not bring himself to go confront them. And a man who's taken his past and has changed it, has changed his parents, and forcing them to change their pasts too. Is it changing what happened? No, what happened will never change. They gave him away, but he does not allow that to dominate his life. Because if he did, it would destroy him, and he knew that. Well, it would be all day he'd be obsessed with why was I given away? What's wrong with me that I was given away? And I've seen many people who are living their lives based on that type of statement. What he did was he picked himself up and tried to figure out what to do with his life. And he today helps many, many people, especially children that are unwanted or were given away. Now, would we all have been happy if it never happened in the first place? Absolutely. But it did. That's not the secret, is how to change the past as if it didn't happen. But he, there's no question in my mind, has brought a light into this world and a refinement into the world that no person but him has brought, and it would never have been brought unless this had happened. Does this justify it? Absolutely not. But does it redeem it? Yes. Because he separated between a painful experience and what comes out of it. Separate between the desire or the object of the desire. It's not the same thing. The people that are the most destructive in this world are the people with the most power. The Talmud says, Kol ha'gadol mechavere yitzrei gadol mimen. The greater a person, the greater is his yetzer hara, the greater is his evil inclination. You'll see the greatest people are the ones that can be most destructive, most passionate. So what do you do with a person who has unbelievable passion? You meet young people all the time. The youngest people, the kids that are acting out more than anyone are the ones with the most power. They're restless because they have energy. Those that don't have, are not doing much, is because they don't have much energy. Like the kid that came home from school with a mark, a B- on his report card. So his father says to him, listen to me. You either get an A+ or a D or F. Mediocrity I will not tolerate. Either absolutely excellent or absolutely terrible. But not mediocre. That we don't do in this family. So there's something to be said for that. And this is a very complicated thing because it's so much easier when you see someone who is behaving in a certain way and is destructive. The first thing we do is we judge. The first thing we do is we reject. Second, we do anything to get them out of the way. It is the people who understand that this is a power of a soul that's run amok. It's like a soul out of control. A fire out of control. That doesn't mean it resolves the issue, but at least it separates between the two things, between seeing that intensity and learning how now to redirect it. And this is absolutely what's possible. So let's go back to the story of Pesach Sheni. What happened there? These Jews came to Moses and they cried out. They didn't just come quietly. They cried out, Lama Nigara. Why are we deprived? They felt a lack. They did not get something that others got. Pesach provides the tool to transcendence. That's what Pesach means. Passover is the transcendence. Spiritually, psychologically, it's leaving all the limits and constraints of our lives. So imagine that you hear that a group of your friends, one night, were invited to come to this spiritual retreat and were able to open up, new doors and new opportunities. And you missed it. You missed the appointment. So you'd think you're disadvantaged. They're the ones in an advantage situation. They got something, a key, a gift, the gift of Passover, the gift of freedom, and you're stuck. So there's two things that can happen now. You can start what's called self-pitying yourself. Self-pity. Oh, look at me. Look at them. The grass is greener on the other side. Look how privileged everyone else is. Look how bad I am. And then you can go into a deep analysis of how damaged goods you are. Why did I miss it? Because I'm always missing things. That's what everybody always told me, my parents, my this one, my that one, that you're a failure. And the more you dwell on this, the bigger of a failure you become, because you convince yourself, you make a whole case. As we all know, anything we dwell upon becomes stronger. So you dwell and dwell and dwell. And that becomes the story of your life. Another approach, same person, same loss, did not missed an opportunity, says, 1 second, I don't understand. Why I want to have what they had. And they come knocking on the doors, in this case to Moses, and say, Loma Negar, what is this? I'm not damaged goods. I'm not inferior. For whatever reason, I missed it. Okay, even if I made a mistake, even if it was intentional, so what? Today, I feel I want to do it. This passion of a person who feels deprived is more powerful than the passion of the people who experienced the transcendence in the first Pesach. Because they got it as a gift. They didn't have to work as hard. This passion evokes in Moses and in God ultimately a very deep energy, which is, you know what? You really wanted that much? You can have it. In other words, this person took their deprivation, their loss, and turned it into a force that opened up a whole new channel that would never have been opened. The channel of hope. That's what the power of a past, of a negative past can be. In other words, sometimes the outcry of something you've lost or something that has hurt you, if it's directed towards positive growth and not towards self-pity and further perpetuating a negative cycle, will end up opening up doors that a positive experience can never open up. And in many, many ways. What does it require in the side of a person to get to a place like that? That's, of course, the challenge. But you have to know that those two options are there. And people can choose both ways. It's your choice. So we're not talking about changing the past and saying, you know what, if I wasn't so hurt, I'd be able to do that. No, no, no. We're talking about two people who are hurt the same way, and one instead dwells on the negative and how I am a victim and the self-pity and all the other stuff that comes with it. And another learns to separate the two with work. And sometimes it begins with just setting your mind to it. And always it begins with finding other people that have that strength. Because you know what self-pity loves the most? Other people with self-pity. Self-pity club. So people in that club don't necessarily, they reinforce all your negative feelings. Oh, you think you're a shmata? I'll tell you what means a shmata, and then everybody is in the same boat, of sob stories. Now, I'm not suggesting that a person has no right to dwell upon or some way feel bad. Like I know a great person, who's still healing, coming from a very, very complicated past, but she still gravitates back to one question. It's not fair. Now, I would never tell somebody to tell them, well, it was fair, because obviously it wasn't fair. Why would an innocent child have to be hurt? It's true that's not fair. But I always tell her, I said to them, that statement is your undoing. God should say that. I'll say it. Others will speak on your behalf. You shouldn't be saying it's not fair, because then you continue the victimization. That you are a person that unfair things were done to. How is that going to get you anywhere? Now, emotionally, that's the feeling of a child. You come home and you miss something. So you say, it's unfair. Why you cry? But this is where we turn to adults, where we say to ourselves, it may have been unfair, and I may never understand the mysterious reasons why this happened to me, but I'm not going to remain and gravitate back to that place. And she always tells me, listen, am I not entitled to be a child again, and someone should nurture me and love me and say it's going to be all right? That's what I want. So of course it breaks your heart, because everyone's entitled to crave and want that. But at the same time, you'll never get it, because other people will not be able to provide something that you yourself cannot build up. What happens often is people like that look for a partner who is like a mother and a father that will compensate for the lack of love that you got in childhood. But that's not a fair situation, because you remain the victim and you just don't want someone else to be your mother to come and fix it. You have to learn to separate it yourself. And again, I'm using very strong examples, because by using strong examples, you could always apply this to easier situations where it's much easier to accomplish. In easier situations, it's when we have made mistakes. Let's take the classic one, is relationships. So we have all been burned in some way in relationships. Disappointments, betrayals. So if you're at a place that you recognize you made the mistake, if you're at a place where you're blaming everyone else, I don't know if you're ready yet for any real healing. But if you're ready to look at yourself, what have you done wrong? And let me just elaborate, and that means, people that say that, I know someone I was speaking to recently, and he tells me he doesn't know what it's about him, but all the women he meets are all crackpots. That's the word he used. I said, crackpots? So why are you attracting all these crackpots? He says, that's a mystery. I said, maybe something about you that you got to look at. And obviously he knows that, but he's still in a place where he's focusing on other people, and doesn't realize that if it's one person, okay, but if it's 3, 4, 5, what's with you? But if you're at a place where you can recognize something about yourself, there is no question, with the help of another person, you can distinguish between a mistake you made, the pain that it caused, and the things that you can redeem from that past. And I would say it's probably the most glorious and dignified human venture, where a person can learn to redeem a past, a broken past. And of course, the classic story is Moses himself, when the Jews build the golden calf. No more malicious and intentional betrayal necessary than that. A collective betrayal of God by people who 39 days earlier heard from God, do not build other gods, do not worship other gods, went and defied it publicly in the worst possible way. In ways that we say that every sin has a taste of the sin of the golden calf. So it still affects us till this day, what they did. It's essentially the betrayal of yourself and your beliefs. Who has not betrayed themselves in some way? So it all has a taste from that. So you would think, what did God do? God said, listen, this is unacceptable. I gave them the 10 Commandments. I gave them all the opportunities. And they did this. Kill them all. And you, Moses, who were with me on the mountain when it happened, will build a new nation. Sounds logical. But Moses refuses to accept it and goes and marches back up on the mountain and says to God, no way. You don't forgive them, then erase my name from your book, your holy book. You don't forgive them, I don't want to no longer have a relationship with you. This is serious stuff. Moses, a man of God, is telling God, erase my name from the book of life, the book of God, because you won't forgive people who made a serious grave error. Why did he take their side? So obviously he didn't take their side because he let them have it too. But Moses understood the secret, that there's something deeper, that if there's a true love between God and the people, no matter what betrayal happens, you have to dig deeper and find a deeper answer. And he was absolutely confident that there was that love. So he went marching back up on the mountain, 40 days and 40 nights, he demands forgiveness. To no avail, those who called Yemei Kas, actually called God days of wrath, that God is showing wrath and anger. And then finally, the last 40 days, he goes up again, the last 40 days, which is the month of Elul and the month of Tishrei, the 10 first days of Tishrei, till Yom Kippur. And he finally wins and prevails. Salachti kidvarecha, and God gives him the greatest gift of all, and that's called hope. And Yom Kippur is the birth of hope. You ever wonder why it's the holiest day of the year? Everyone knows the holiest day of the year, but why? What makes it so holy? Because something was achieved in Yom Kippur that no other day in the year gave, and that is hope. That people can make mistakes, that's part of nature. But that they can fix them and change the past, that is unprecedented. And it was Moses that initiated that. Very similar to what happened on Pesach Sheni, when the Jews came saying, Lama Negara, why are we deprived? Moses said the same thing. Now what do you think God told Moses on the mountain? I wasn't there, so I can't tell you exactly what was said, but we know from the Torah, it tells us some of the details. So I'll paraphrase. God said to Moses, what do you want from me? They put their hand in fire, they got burned. The laws of nature dictate cause and effect. You made a mistake, now you have to live with the consequences. I didn't make the mistake, they made the mistake. What would you say if you were Moses? Well, what Moses said was, look, I'm not saying they didn't make a mistake. I know they made a mistake. But you created human beings in a flawed way. No human beings are perfect. If you're telling me that a person makes a mistake and can't be fixed, so what am I supposed to say? We'll build a new nation, and they'll make a mistake, and you'll kill, and then again we start from scratch. I need to give the people back a message that even if you make a mistake, you can change it. So God said, but this is a system I created. The sun rises in the morning, the moon in the evening. When you put your hand in fire, you get burned. When you do good things, there are good results. It's cause and effect. And Moses, in his brilliance, says to God, cause and effect. Who's the one that created this cause and effect? It's you that created the fire, created the burn, created the consequences. So I'm asking you to go back to your so-called master program, before you wrote all these programs of cause and effect, to go to a place that actually can change the effect. That even though you put your hand in fire, the hand won't get burned. How do you do that? So Moses didn't expect that the hand won't get burned, but give me a door that opens up, that can compensate, and open up a new channel, greater than the one before, even though there was hurt. So in healing, in medicine, you have examples of it. I think I've mentioned this in the past. God forbid someone has a stroke. There's a phenomenon, especially if you catch it early. that nerves that were severed and nerves that were damaged by a stroke, which means the blood flow, simply the blood flow of the heart did not reach parts of the brain. So you think they're dead and that's it. There's a phenomenon which is not uncommon, where the nerves will regrow and bypass the damaged area and recreate every connection that was there before. Now, it's true not every part of the body regenerates like that, but what is that exactly? Well, psychologically, you have the same thing. There are people who, because of a certain handicap in one area, built the strength in another area that gives them much more power than those that don't have the original handicap. So, what you see from all of this, and that's what Moses achieved in heaven on Yom Kippur, he didn't ask for God and say, listen, they shouldn't forget, they should be forgiven for their mistakes as if nothing happened. They have to pay their price. But I need to be able to tell the human race, and every human being forever and ever, that even if they make a mistake, or a mistake happened in their lives that they didn't do, someone else did, there has to be new channels that can be opened up. Where do you get those new channels? Only when you reach a place that's higher than time and space. So God said to Moses, okay, I will give you that, but the condition, of course, is they have to access that place. If they're going to continue to live by the rules of cause and effect themselves, and by the rules of time of past, present, and future, then they will not be able to go there. So this wasn't a condition, it's just the logic of it. If you do not reach a place of that type of well of new hope, and you continue to play the victim, you have written your script that there is no hope. It is only possible if you reach a place that's beyond. When I watch some people who have grown through different challenging pasts, again, the common denominator is not only that they separated, but also that they are able to reach a place that's deeper than the rest can reach. And from there they derive new types of strength that you could never have imagined. Does that mean that they don't cry for their losses? No, it doesn't mean that. It's like someone told me, you lose someone close to you, so it's like a hole in your heart. It doesn't ever go away. It's like a hole in your living room. And you keep falling into it every time you walk through your room. And then you learn to start walking around it. And when you learn to start walking around it, you start building strengths. Because you learn that you have to be ingenious and different type of ingenuity and wisdom and strengths to compensate for that hole that's there. And you build different things that can only come from that place. I can only describe it personally from my only real loss in my life, in a physical sense. At least my father passed away 4 years ago, this coming week actually. And I will say I have very many happy years with my father, so I don't have anything to complain about. He was 70 years old. Anyone that lost a parent knows you never forget it. And how many times a day you think about the parent. And trust me, I had my arguments with my father. And that's what I miss too, actually, when we used to fight. And but there's something that I got in return that I did not have before 4 years ago. There's no question on a level of intensity, on commitment to certain things that I made as a result of my father's death, I would never would have been born had it not been due to his death. Would I prefer to still be here? Absolutely. That's not the question. But I'm not dwelling on it in the same way. But I did learn to channel that, the grief and loss, into very positive things. Science can speak from personal experience. I am sure you have examples yourself. Obviously, a situation like that is a little easier than other situations that sometimes are so overwhelming it's not so easy to just channel. But the point is it's always possible. So what we learn from this message, this Pesach Sheni message, is that we have a past. That's undeniable. We all have pasts. We also have pasts sometimes that are haunting pasts, that have affected us very profoundly. Mistakes. And from here on is where we diverge. What will you do now? Will it be that you continue to be a product of your past? Or will you be able to reach to a place that's a new channel completely and bring down another energy that transcends that past? This is very relevant to relationships. People who tell me, I've given up hope, to me is the saddest thing because they're not right. They're simply not right. How do you tell someone you're absolutely wrong? Someone told me they're 47 years old, they're never going to get married. I could give them 50 cases of people who did. But they are defeating themselves because they've written a script. So the past continues to haunt the future. So you have to have the outcry of a person has to be desperate, but that desperation then has to lead to a place that opens up a door. Now, practically speaking, it's not always easy to do yourself. That's why we have each other. You have to connect yourself to people who understand that cry and know how to help you open up that channel. And then you have to listen. That's the most important thing. If someone that cares about you has no agenda and shares and suggests something to you that you have not done before, sometimes you just have to listen blindly, actually. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you have to, but let's put it this way. What's there to lose? If nothing else has worked, maybe that will work. And I can tell you it will work precisely because it's not doing what you think is right. And you're doing what someone else who is objective is suggesting. Again, with no agendas, I'm not talking about someone saying things that are offensive or things that are problematic. That's why we have each other. And that's why we as souls can help each other. So I'm here to give you the news that you can do something about your past. Serious things. Childishly, we would just like to go back to that past, change it, and like it never happened. That's nice. That's not the way it works. What you can go back to is change it, and it's happened, but that happening disappears, and what's left are only seeds of growth. That is absolutely in our power. That obviously is a much more sophisticated way of changing the past, but it's powerful. It requires going to places that are above time and space, as I said. It requires, above all, reaching into parts of your soul that you would never have reached on your own. And why some of us are so-called blessed to have to reach deeper places because others were deprived, other sections were deprived from us, I will not be able to answer that question. But once the situation is such, we absolutely have that power. And that's ultimately what happened when these small group came and said, Lama Nigara. It started with a cry. It started with a demand that we are deserving to have what others have. And because that cry came from the depths of their hearts, in many ways they reached places that the first Pesach could never reach. Can you imagine? That by being deprived of something should give you something double the amount of those that weren't deprived. That's a pretty big thing. So imagine if that's possible, what possibilities each of us have in this life. That's what I'm here to report to you. So I hope not just that you accept what I'm saying because I said it in a sincere way, but also that you find the tools to achieve this. And the tools require, as I said, number one, your own openness to it. Number two, the right people that can help you get to that place. So with that being said, let me say to everybody a happy Pesach Sheni. And even though the time in 3,321 years ago it was, 22 years ago actually, 20 years ago, 3,320 years ago, it was only a small group of people, but they gave us a gift for all of us, for all of us for the rest of time, and a message that we can share with ourselves, with others, and obviously with the people that we have influence on and impact on. So, though it's always, I never like to say the end of something good, let's say that we all take energy from this evening and carry it into our lives. As we leave here tonight, everyone goes back to their lonely path in life. Existential loneliness. Everyone has their lonely path. There's places that only you go to. You don't even know you don't even believe anyone else can go to. That may be true, may or may not be true. But there are forces at work, whether we see them or not, that give us strength even in those lonely times, even those quiet times. And there are people that will be sent your way in life that are there being sent for a reason, that if you have the question, they can provide the answer. Or maybe the other way around. If you have the answer, they can provide the question. So God should bless us all to be open, keep your eyes open for those messages and for those people and for those channels of hope that help us all carve new paths in this world that we live in. And I hope that I can grow from you. I'm sorry, the other way, that you grow through me as much as I've grown through you and through many of others that have come to this class, even on the internet and on the web. And we continue this grand journey of playing music together, wherever we are, here in New York or in Frankfurt or in other places in the world. And in a sense, this universe, even though it's split up in physical time and space, but there are forces that can transcend time and space, as if it did not, as if there was nothing separating us at all. So everyone have a very good night, and until next Wednesday. I will say that there may be a change in plan and schedule next Wednesday, but I'll send out an email. If you get the weekly emails, just write your email address here. But even if you do, we also have a special list of announcing changes, or every Wednesday an update goes out about this class. If you're not on that list and you don't get that, just tell Golda Malk in the front, and she'll be happy to make sure you get those announcements as well. And tomorrow night, Philip does his extraordinary creative spirituality series. Any other announcements for me to say? I did? For this class? Well, so until next week, everyone have a very good week and a pleasant time. Thank you very much. Be well.